Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and I've been thinking how interesting it is that there are so many creative partnerships in the world of musicals which are based on two people being very temperamentally different. Of course there's Gilbert and Sullivan, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, and Ginger Rogers and Freddie Starr. I'm not sure that last one's quite right. But you get the idea. Well, another partnership where the two creators were very different in temperament was Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart, often known as Larry Hart. And if you're a regular listener of Musical Talk, you'll know that over the last 2 weeks we've been taking an in-depth look at the songs that they wrote for the show The Boys from Syracuse, and talking to the director and the musical director of the latest off-West End revival of this 1938 evergreen musical theatre comedy piece. Because The Boys from Syracuse by Rodgers and Hart is back in London. And if you want to see it, you can. It's running at the venue known as Upstairs at the Gatehouse in Highgate Village, London North 6, 4BD, until the 29th of September. The nearest tube station is Highgate on the Northern Line. And it's a wonderful opportunity to see a magnificent show from the golden era of musical theatre. And in many ways it's a high water mark in terms of its writing, with a book by George Abbott, and its score by Rodgers and Hart. It is one of my favourite scores, and I don't think there's a single bad song in the entire piece. I'll be giving you details of how you can see this show and find out more about it and book tickets at the end of the programme. But before then, we're going to hear the second part of that wonderful conversation I had with the equally wonderful Benjamin Levy, the musical director and orchestrator of this production of The Boys from Syracuse. As you heard last week, he's a man who really knows what he's talking about and takes a 360-degree view of working in musical theatre. He is a musical director and an orchestrator, but goodness, everything he said showed that he looks at it from outcomes and from every direction. A true man of the theatre, as I said last week. It was such a joy to talk to him, and it was even more of a pleasure because he's an expert on the songs from this show. Now, you'll have heard last week that we had a chance to analyse a few of those, to see what they're doing creatively, both musically and in terms of the lyrics, and how together they were also serving the plot. This week, I'm delighted to say we're going to be concentrating a lot more on that. And that is one of my favourite things to do here on Musical Talk. A forensic analysis of some of the best written songs in musical theatre from the 20th century. This was a treat of a conversation, and I do hope you'll enjoy listening to it now. So, without further ado, to quote Shakespeare, let's rejoin Benjamin and me in conversation about The Boys from Syracuse, and in particular, that wonderful, sparkling score by Richard Rodgers and Larry Hart. Musical Talk. Shall we tackle the first number? I don't mean the prologue, I do mean I Have Twins.
Yeah.
Now, I discussed this a little bit with Mark, but I really like your take on it from your musical director's perspective. It strikes me it's almost like no other song in the entire piece. The others are much more identifiable as songs in the broadest sense of what we understand that to be. This is clearly a song, but it sets the story. It's the world-building song for this musical. It is a darn sight more sophisticated as a world-building song than some of the things we would have got in the 1930s. I will proudly declare my love for the Gershwin brothers throughout, and Lady Be Good is wonderful, but it doesn't set up a world in quite the same way at the beginning. We have this very strange situation where we have, musically, it feels like two or three different songs almost fuse together seamlessly. But the beginning is not like the middle, is not like the end.
No.
And also that beginning part where we've got the audience baying for blood, hurrah, hooroo, there's going to be a killing, as you quite rightly identified. Then we get what you might call the interrogation or explanation to the crowd in Ephesus as to what's gone on, why there's this crowd baying for blood in the first place. And what you get is a role for the orchestra. There's like a lyric line missing. And so there's a piece of music with no lyrics on it, which then a kind of narrator character who's sort of, I think we have to assume, is sort of speaking to the populace what the decision of the people in charge, or the gods, or the royal family, whoever's in charge, are saying. So you've got the high authorities not actually voiced, and then there's the interpretation to the public, and then there's the Gilbert and Sullivan response to that. And that goes all the way through the interrogation of the father who's lost his wife and his children, and is looking for them and has stumbled into Ephesus because he's an ignoramus, as he states, by accident. I didn't know your local laws. That part of the song, as I say, has got this, right at the beginning, you're asked to make this theatrical leap, or get this theatrical understanding that there is someone speaking who's not saying any words, and that is the lyric-free musical line, which is part of the dialogue, he said, in speech marks. I've not explained that very well, I don't think.
Well, musically speaking, that you made a good point that it's a weird collision of three tunes. There's the Hurrah Hooroo theme, which is almost military. It's in two. It's a quite a strict military. There's no swing rhythm. No, it's very, very straight.
Sets up a regime as a concept, doesn't it?
Which is probably speaks to the militism. Is that a word?
It is now.
It is now.
Mr. Shakespeare.
Thank you very much. It speaks to how to the militant crowd, really, baying for blood. They are as one. That was one moment where I thought harmonies were totally inappropriate. That should be unison line, because it represents that they are all of one mind. It's unison of mind, unison of note. Apart from the ending, which famously is very, very thick chords. Yes, yes, yes. I've copied it exactly as it is, because I thought its function in the storytelling was much more important. But you've got this military hurrah hooroo theme. Yeah. You've got the I had twins, or he had twins for. I can't remember the lyrics now, but with these very clashing chords.
There's nothing much to gin him.
There's nothing much to gin him. Yes. It's a bit of a cheeky one, that.
That's much more Gilbert and Sullivan, actually, I think. Yeah.
Much more Gilbert. Which we presume means against him.
Yeah.
Or initially, in the original read-through, the actor in question said aging him. Not quite. Not quite.
It is. I believe it's a Scottish dialect thing, which might have been more prevalent in America. It's certainly a slang term. I've got nothing against him.
Which is. It's quite funny. It's very cheeky. It did ultimately have to rhyme with. I didn't know he had it in him.
Yes,
which is a wonderful lyric. Anyway, he had twins. I didn't know he had it in him.
Yes.
We can only presume what that meant. I think it's funny. You look at that and think, oh, they can't possibly mean. Oh, I think they do.
Yep.
I think there's no question they meant that.
It's a penny drop moment.
Oh yes. And of course the stage direction after that is everyone laughs. So, clearly it's a joke.
Also allowing the audience to do so without losing the rhythm of what's going on. That's really clever writing, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
So do carry on, please.
What's interesting too is in between these episodes, we go from a military march to he had twins, very heavy set crotchets against a very discordant quavers. Bap, 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 bap. It's a real cacophony of sound. But in between these phrases are individual solo lines. Ba-da-da-da-dum. And all it's doing is not letting the audience settle into any one sound for too long.
This isn't what you are expecting, audience. It's what you get. Yes,
it's very unusual. We'll pass. It's a chromatic. Normally, it's a solo chromatic scale of some sort. Ba-da-da-da, ending in a hit. Dum each time. Which I've tried to match the original orchestration as best I can. I think the instruments chosen in the original orchestration, sometimes it's a xylophone, there's a reason why they were chosen. So for the most part, I've tried as best I can to replicate the same
that across,
effect. Yeah. It might be that what was a xylophone is now piano. At least it's still got the percussive element. But it's really, I think the brilliance of it is the audience have absolutely no idea what's coming next, which you have to listen to the lyric. You can't be just carried away by anything comfortable, because you're not allowed to listen to any one tune for longer than about 20 seconds. What's really funny is that when Adrian finally speaks, and tells his sad story, it's a very, very cheerful, I had twins who looked alike. It's a very up-tempo, and everything's echoed by a flute. I had twins who looked alike. It's ludicrous. Why on earth would you do that? I think really we're hearing the story, but we're hearing it through the perspective of the crowd.
Yeah. Do you get the impression that that's of exactly the flute echo, if you like, is almost someone turning to their shoulder to the person behind it? Oh, he had twins who looked alike.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Are you getting this?
It's the penny drops.
Yeah.
Really. But the I am glad to die, it's and actually that's a brilliant moment from Rodgers there. It's suddenly everything's been at speech level. I couldn't tell one from the other. I am glad to die is up the octave. It's a top
It's where
tier.
Rex Harrison would have trouble.
Yes, it is. So suddenly you actually have to sing.
Yes.
It's nothing short of a cry for help. It's quite. But no sooner does he get that final release moment when he had twins. No time to dwell on that. We move straight on.
Yeah.
So and I think the pace of musical movement is also representative of the crowd's excitement. I mean, normally when we're in a heightened state, we feel things a lot for less time.
Oh, that's an interesting observation. I'm not sure I'd ever clocked that particularly.
So, I mean, I think it's got the dual benefit, whether intentionally or otherwise, we've got the dual benefit of keeping the audience on their feet whilst keeping the pace of movement going. We're not allowed to indulge. There are no pauses.
No.
Once the first downbeat's there, the music keeps moving. There's no rests. I mean, I think that there are louder moments and quieter moments, but I think that's also partly the job of the little solo instrumental moments, is to keep it moving. There are moments where we'll rest on a note, but there's no silence. Straight through.
Isn't that interesting?
So, I've been, on that number particularly, I've been very, very strict with the actors. Don't indulge. Move on.
No, it's not for stylising, is it?
Not at all.
It's absolutely, and it really does set up the world. Everything you need to know about the story you're about to see is in that story. The world they're in, the geopolitical situation between Ephesus and Syracuse is mentioned and explained. You have the personal tragedy of the father, and that tells you that he's got twins, and they've got twin slave boys, I think is the phrase used, the Dromios.
Yes.
That being their name. So you know the characters that are going to be coming up as well. It's a wonderful song that does so much, and it just doesn't feel like, I can't think of a similar thing from 1930s musicals.
I'm struggling. I'm struggling. And I think, actually, Hart's done a wonderful job there. I think Richard Rodgers has smashed it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wonderful use of thematic writing. And really, he joins people's perspectives together by using the same theme. It's a very simple trick, but I think it's brilliantly executed. His use of harmony, his use of rhythm. I mean, I had twins for them. I'm butchering the lyric now, but it's this incessant ba 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 ba. It's just hammering away at this chord. But I think it's a wonderful use of thematic writing. It really helps the audience link perspectives together, and it keeps the thing moving. I think it was making that a song was a wonderful choice. You could have written it as a scene, of course you could.
You could, yeah. Or make it a song with a scene with one of those three songs in it.
Yes, yes. But I think it allows a lot to happen in the space of 4 minutes.
It feels longer, but not in a bad way, I always think.
No.
Because you do feel that, this is a properly intense meal I'm getting here. And then the next song along is I Want to Go Back to Syracuse, which actually is a very...
totally different. It's a very relaxed... I mean, if it were a dance, it'd be a soft shoe shuffle. Syracuse.
Do you know, that was exactly what I was saying. I had the chance to speak informally to Jared, the choreographer, before we met this evening, and we were talking about that very song. Because at one level, I was asking him, just casually, when a song has a kind of feel that automatically makes you think vaudevillian, I can sort of see the character here with a bowler hat or a boater and a cane doing a sort of kind of high strut walk as he's singing, I want to go back to Syracuse. It's that kind of thing. I walk a million miles for one of your smiles, if you want to go back to a slightly earlier but 1920s kind of reference. There is a kind of vaudevillian strut you can sort of imagine.
And that's represented in the lyric as well.
Yeah.
There's a couple of... Hart's flexing his muscles a bit. I mean, it is no metropolis, it has no big acropolis, but yet there is a quorum of cuties in the forum. That is wonderful. That is wonderful writing. And it's a lyric that's very pleased with itself.
Yeah, but rightly so.
Quite rightly so.
Yeah.
I mean, I trust Hart to rhyme quorum with forum. It is no metropolis, it has no big acropolis. You're just showing off now. I hope he gave himself the day off when he wrote that. But I think it's so intelligent that it's funny. It is funny. I mean, you can't take that seriously. That's just Lorenz Hart going, look at this.
He's smart, but do you know, he's smarter than he has any right to be as well, because it's almost a throwaway song in Act 2, which is the, come with us to jail, basically.
Come with me, yes.
Yeah. There's a beautiful triple rhyme in there, which is completely hidden because the triple rhyme is in the middle of sentences, but it's be our guest in a house of rest with the best of fellows to guard you.
The little best slipped in there as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, Sondheim will be pleased with that.
Oh, yes.
Because that's all, those three rhymes just add up together to be beautiful and flavoursome, but they're not where you expect them.
Oh no, it's a little flourish.
Yeah, I'm doing it because I can.
And they're all and there is a proper term for this, you might know. Yeah. It's not approximate, it's perfect rhyme.
Yeah. Craft. We used to call it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no sense of rhyming best with, I don't know, guess.
Yeah.
It's best and west. It's a perfect rhyme the whole way through the show.
Oh yeah, but there's no half rhymes at all.
None at all.
No.
None at all.
Although I was talking with Mark once again that the only occasion I can think where Larry Hart does that is in Manhattan from a different show, much earlier song, and they playfully, there's one rhyme, they girl and boy. And then another time when they repeat it, it's boy and goyle to make the rhyme work. But you're invited to enjoy the fact that they're twisting the pronunciation to make the rhyme work. So it's done playfully and you're invited in. It's not actually presented as the finished work almost.
It's always Monty Python-esque, that sort of. I mean, it's or the classic, almost Dr. Seuss. And if the word doesn't exist, then by all means make it up.
Well, Shakespeare used to do that.
Of course,
absolutely. We're going to move slightly sideways on here, but there was a song from an album. There was a very great British comedian called Marty Feldman. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I know the name.
Yeah, he died a bit young, so he's not really been very remembered. But his heyday was the 60s and 70s. He was one of the original scriptwriters on Round the Horn in the 1960s,
wow.
So that sort of really cemented his name. But he recorded an album in the very early 70s. Some rather wonderful songs in it, all very strange, all very comic. But there's a song called The World's in Rhyme. Oh. And the joke is that this man is singing a song he's written himself, and it's called The World's in Rhyme, and it's full of terrible misrhymes, which even in 1972 people will have understood what the joke was. You can't play that song today to most people because they don't. It's a terrible term, but I'm going to use pop rhyming, exactly the non-perfect rhyming. So it's non-perfect rhyming all the way through, and now people can't see what the joke is. They just think it's a song of rhymes.
Yeah.
When the thing about it is, it's saying, no, where is the craft gone? Anyway, I think, off my soapbox. But
actually, I think as integration has become more of a feature of contemporary writing, then suddenly lyrics become more chatty in nature. Yeah. And suddenly the beautiful poetry that was the original lyric writing is becoming a lost art.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, the problem is I like the fact that musical theatre expands. And of course it must do things, but it doesn't necessarily need to let things go. So there could still be people writing their perfect rhymes with good melodies. What I think of as a classic recipe from the 1930s. And that's harder to find. But,
and actually, of course, late Sondheim was very famous for it.
Yes.
Mind you, it's not an indirect parallel. I mean, we know that Sondheim was famously trained in the art of lyric writing by Oscar Hammerstein II himself.
Indeed. Yes.
I mean, that's not. I mean, we credit Sondheim as the genius he was, but he did rather at the best start, didn't he? He
did. Yeah. I mean, well, that's interesting because I don't know if you read his books about lyrics.
I haven't, no.
Oh, right. Well, they're interesting. They are his collected lyrics with his notes, so they're a very good read. Yeah. Well, there's 2 volumes. One's called Finishing the Hat, and the second one's called I Made a Hat. I've said to a friend of mine, hopefully there'll be a posthumous one called Hat Trick.
Yes.
But he also, in a slightly more bad-tempered way, has written a few essays about lyricists who are famous and well-respected and why they're rubbish.
Yes.
And Larry Hart gets a good blasting.
Gosh.
Gilbert gets a blasting. Noel Coward gets a blasting. And Oscar Hammerstein gets a blasting. Wow. So
his own tutor.
He's kicked the ladder down after him, if I may say.
And he's an interesting one, of course, being a composer-lyricist. But
Sometimes,
I wonder to what extent his remarkable lyric writing ability was down to his musical partnerships with Jules Stein and Bernstein. It must have done.
Absolutely.
They will have had opinions about this.
Oh, crikey, yeah. And Richard Rodgers. We know they didn't get on terribly well, but you can't sit in a room with Richard Rodgers and not pick something.
I think by all accounts, we've given Lorenz Hart a very positive review, as we should. By all accounts, it wouldn't have been that easy to get on with.
Oh, well, he was a drunk, wasn't
Famously,
he? And self-hating. Yeah. No, and I think that tinges his lyrics. I think sadly, it's his great personal weaknesses, which are his professional strengths. Isn't that a terrible tragedy?
I mean, I compared that relationship of the straight-laced, hard-working Richard Rodgers and the almost reprobate, in many respects, reprobate.
Certainly louche, let's put it that way.
Yes. Oh yes, a very sad life by all accounts.
Oh, and over too soon.
Over far too soon.
Yeah.
No, but you can draw a parallel between Webber and Rice in that respect, can't you?
Well, they're still with us, I'm pleased to say, but
Both
yes.
stories. But again,
but yes, you're
Webber's
right.
the hard worker, and Tim Rice, by all accounts, was he'd be happier in the pub than he would be in the writing table. But again, you've got to hand it to him. He certainly has the skills.
And when you put them together, you get something even greater than the
sum of its parts.
Absolutely. I mean, and so often Gilbert and Sullivan are the daddies here, aren't they? You know that they. Gilbert was a bit of a martinet. It's very difficult to see otherwise. And Sullivan didn't. He wanted a quiet life and get on with it. And he wanted to go off to the casinos and visit France. And Gilbert was growing melons and keeping animals, and it's a very different world.
I wish, I'm going to have to paraphrase this.
Please
but
do.
There was a lot. It's a horrible paraphrase as well. But there was a wonderful comment that Rodgers apparently made, which it's something to the tune of, when I met. He talks about when he met Lorenz Hart for the first time. I met in him it was something like my best friend, my closest collaborator, and the biggest pain. All in one. I wish I could remember his exact
It's like
words,
getting a brother.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, absolutely.
But actually, I think. I mean, you made the case. It was a real professional asset. I think it must have been.
Yeah.
He was. And actually, I draw a parallel between the way that Lorenz Hart writes so directly, and at times almost coldly about love. Sondheim did the same.
I think that's a parallel. I really do. Yeah.
I mean, even not just love songs in terms of romantic love songs. I think the way that Sondheim writes mother characters is absolutely remarkable.
But here's a question, and Mark was talking about this last week, which is that there's a difference between Hart and Sondheim, which I think I agree with, which is actually Sondheim can sometimes allow himself to fall into cynical.
Yes.
Whereas, funnily enough, I don't get the impression that Hart quite gets into cynical. I think Hart, cynicism is a veneer, it's a protection. And I think Hart actually is painfully honest. I think that what you get is you go straight to his heart, ironically, warts and all his weaknesses, and that gives it that bittersweet tinge, but with the hope, the possible redemption. But he's not hiding anything. So
no.
I think you get a rawer, more honest lyric from Lorenz Hart about love than you do from Stephen Sondheim.
I'd agree, and the effect of the narrative is you get a more 3 or 4 dimensional view of the character themselves. I mean, Fall in Love with Love's a great example. I mean, it's a simple trick. It's the classic shtick of actually This Can't Be Love is a better example of the lyric is it's a definitely This Can't Be Love. I feel so well. Definitely not love. You know it is. It's very clear it is, but it's the same trick really as people can say we're in love from people that will say we're in love for Oklahoma. It's unthinkable. They're very obviously mad in love.
Yeah.
But there is no cynicism. It's realism more than cynicism.
Oh, that's a good word. Can I say, by the way, This Can't Be Love is so clever. It references, once again, it's so meta. This is, you said earlier that you know that when something clever happens, it's clever because they know it's clever. This can't be love because I feel so well. My heart does not stand still. Rodgers and Hart, 10 years earlier, had a song called My Heart Stands Still. They were creating the cliches, which they then overturned 10 years later. That is that's a wonderful lyric. My heart stood still, which is actually one of my favourite Rodgers and Hart songs. It's a one-off song they wrote for a British production. It was a C.B. Cochrane review, the late 20s, I think, and that was the song they added to it, and it was a huge hit. It's a wonderful song as well. But to take that and then make that the paradigm that you're saying isn't in place. And then I think they do something wonderful. And I assume there's the inverted reprise in this production.
There is. There was a very brief discussion between myself and Mark, our director, and we're going to keep the reprise, right? Yeah. We have to, because there's a lovely lyric shift. My heart does not stand still. It skipped a beat. Yeah, and that's a very important shift. And I think it's of course it's sung by a different character, but we absolutely need to follow that theme through. We have to.
But I tell you what's really interesting about that as well, because so you get this can't be love, and they take all the cliches and say, but these don't apply to me. And yet I love to look in your eyes. You know, at the end there's the kind of, but I am here. And then we get the reprise a little bit later, as you say, a different character who sings basically the inverted version of that song. So it's almost like you're hearing a first draft of what that song might have been. I'm going to write a love song where all the cliches are in place. So her heart does miss a beat, exactly as you say. All the things that they've earlier said aren't happening are happening to her. It suggests two different things. It suggests they're cleverer than she is, but it also suggests that she's more sincere, perhaps.
Yes.
You know, she's actually in the moment. But it also has a very odd effect, I think, which is actually, oddly, although it has a dramatic purpose, as you've identified, it also shows you that the song would be much less good if it was done at face value. It is the Hartian twist, if you like, that gives that song its sophistication, the complexity that you were talking about earlier. And then on top of that, it's done with this beautiful up-tempo Richard Rodgers melody.
And in a major key, by all accounts, very, very cheerful, very. If it were a dance, it would also be a sultry shuffle.
Well, it was a dance in the 30s. It was one of the two big hits from the show. There were several, but it was one of the ones that sold like a rocket. So.
And I mean, by all accounts, it's also the finale of the show.
Yeah.
It's the very last thing we hear. What I like about that song actually is it really makes the musical staging do the work.
Oh, go on.
Because you're presented with a sad lyric, a very cheerful melody. Which side do you want? It's going to be the way in which it's staged and presented that really has the final say. And Jared, I know, had a lot of fun with that one. It's a cat and mouse chase, really. It's a bit like the "Baby, It's Cold Outside" trick.
Frank Lesser.
Yeah. But it's the the whole thing's it's not ironic because they're not trying to be ironic.
No.
But
there's a disparity.
There is a disparity.
Yeah.
And the audience,
or a dynamic tension.
And to make the audience realise that takes skill.
Yeah.
Because you can't just present a love song, because it's not. I mean, and these are high status characters that wouldn't lower themselves so. And the stake actually that in as a scene, the stakes are very different for Luciana and for Antipholus in that moment.
They are,
because it's Antipholus S. But as far as
that's from Syracuse.
From Syracuse, which means that of course the whole thing's based on they're identical twins. The Luciana in that moment believes she's talking to her brother-in-law.
Yeah,
she isn't, as it happens, because it's the twin. But it means that Antipholus is going into that with, I'm pursuing her.
Yes,
the stakes are very low. But Luciana, who is having very real feelings, the stakes are much higher for her.
They're real, aren't they? Yeah.
So the scene is, although they both feel the connection, they both have very different feelings about it. So that's where the musical staging has to realise that, because they're singing the same words, they're singing the same melody, they're having very different experiences, and I think it's the musical staging uniquely that has to bring that out.
Isn't that interesting? And once it's so much of what we've been talking about has been that dynamic tension between what might seem like an odd marriage between the eviscerating but bittersweet hope of a heart sentimental lyric against the sincerely bouncy and often positive Rodgers melody. But somehow they fuse together. I mean, when you're playing and performing, I mean, we're back to that. What surprises you about Rodgers? But actually, what surprises you about the songs? Which songs have really knocked your socks off? Do you mind my asking?
Not at all.
Can I just make one further point? I think this is a score that hasn't got a duff song in it, by the way.
I agree.
Not a single bad song.
I agree. One we struggled with only was He and She, only because it's long. It's very long, and the whole point of it really is that it's he said this, she said this, and the whole thing builds up to a joke punchline.
Yeah.
But the punchline itself, it's funny. It's not good enough to warrant.
It's not the ending of a song, really. Is it? You feel there's one more verse to be had, ironically, even though it's long. But you feel you need the killer punchline. Yeah.
So
I agree with that.
It's the only song we've cut, not completely, but I've removed verses. We kept the joke the same. We're having to reduce playing time anyway.
Yeah, quite.
But that's one with the whole team agreed.
It just needed a bit of work.
It did. It's just, and with modern audiences today, I think that it being shorter and more concise hits better.
It can pay off better, can't it? Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, obviously purists, and I'm not a purist, but I like the originals, but also the originals are recorded. I can hear those.
They are. And
I want new versions because new versions live.
They do. And actually, if I look at this, I mean, the orchestrations are hugely different anyway. I mean, I think there are 5 or 6 cast albums out for the show now. And the contrast between them is, at times, enormous.
Oh, crikey, yeah. Absolutely.
I made a point initially when I thought I've got the written material in front of me here to work with. I've also got 5 soundtracks. If there's a good idea going on in a different cast album, I'll draw on it. It might be that I'll realise it differently. It might be that I liked one triangle moment, which I'll carry over. But I've sort of surrounded myself with all the possible ways in which these ideas have been musically realised, and then used that for inspiration to realise it some other way. You really can't.
The Levy way.
The Levy way, the Levy orchestration, and there's something very satisfying about it. I've actually, quite short of how on earth, I've had a few people ask me, how on earth are you going to realise that huge orchestral sound with 5 players? I'm not.
No,
I'm absolutely not going to try.
Yeah,
I've got.
That's a hiding to nothing, isn't it?
Oh, certainly, it's doomed to fail. But I've got 5 very interesting instruments, all capable of creating very different colours. And I've got a cast which, with solo voice ensemble, are creating very, very clear, vibrant storytelling. That's my arsenal. It's celebrate what you do have in the pit. Don't apologise for what you don't.
That's a wonderful attitude, and ties in with what Mark's approach is as well, because it's not falling into all the traps in terms of its staging and direction either, is it? It is a fresh take on how it can be done. That became very clear last week when I was talking to Mark, and I'm really pleased to hear that you're echoing that. So you were talking about then.
I might. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You asked me, is there any songs which stand out? What's almost more interesting is what's my role as the player. This is one thing that playing the show has. Whilst it has its own logistical difficulties with how flaming heck am I going to keep this
how
whole
many
thing
hands
together?
you got?
But it does. I think it's going to affect my direction of it because I'm having to be very physically involved. So in a song like This Can't Be Love, it's a very good thing that the music is very upbeat and very positive because, I mentioned earlier that the lyric tells the story, the music tells us how to receive it, and I think the fact that the music is so upbeat suggests that behind it all, it's a positive song. They are in love, which they are. I think it would have been a horrendous miscarriage of justice to set it any other way. So I think in terms of my role within that, it's my role to push the positivity. The band is pushing the positivity.
Quote Harold Arlen and say, accentuate the positive.
Accentuate the positive.
It's actually, I've just realised he didn't write the lyric. Who wrote the lyric for that? That's Johnny Mercer. Sorry, my apologies.
But it might be that as the musical director for the overall piece, I understand there's a disparity going on there. But the band are none the wiser. We're pushing the positive, the lyric is pushing the negative, and the musical staging shows the audience how to receive the information.
Oh, that's interesting. So, forgive me, you've just blown my mind a little bit there. You as the musical director have got the overview of what's going on, but your band, your orchestra, if you take them as at face value, are there to represent the music and therefore the positives. So they are the voice of one part of the song.
I think so. So it might be that we're pushing the positive, and that's why earlier I mentioned that the musical staging is so important. If you were to put together a lovely little dance, you've missed the point entirely. We've got a very positive musical backdrop. We've now got a physical language which is also very positive. The lyric will get lost. So I think often the inherent conflict between, say, the lyric and the music will need to be represented with a disparity between the choreography, say, and the musical backdrop. So it's often a case of what is the role of the music, i.e. the band, within the context of this debate. So it might be that we're blissfully unaware.
You're sincerely playing the music as written, the end almost, which of course is not true, but is if the orchestra was an actor.
Yes, which I think we are.
Yeah, well, of course you're certainly. Yeah, I mean, as part of the collaborative process, definitely. But I'd never thought of looking at an orchestra as a character, shall we say, with a viewpoint.
I think often
this is fabulously interesting.
And of course, I've had to get very involved with this when it comes to orchestrations because I mean, really, with little triangle moments here, I'm making musical offers. So ultimately, it's whose team are we on? Why are we playing this?
Yeah.
And what do we mean by it? So really, in many ways, the band, I do see the band as a character because we're very actively involved in the conversation. I don't see the band necessarily as an accompanying feature. There are times when we're very much in the forefront. We start the show.
You do, and also you're the ballet.
With the ballet.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that's interesting, because you were talking about when on the mixer board of things going on, music, lyric, and choreography. But if you take the lyric out, which is what the ballet does,
yes,
then actually you're left with the combination you don't see so often, which is choreography against the music.
Yes.
Where do you go on the sincerity, insincerity spectrum there, do you think?
I think suddenly our role becomes to clarify the choreography. I've really enjoyed collaborating with Jared.
Yeah.
And actually, for the most part, he told me what he needed. We sat down with Mark and Jared and myself. We had a conversation.
The three who rule.
The three who rule. the creatives in power.
Yeah.
And we thought, what needs to happen? I mean, we look at this hugely florid piece of music. It was not going to serve our purpose.
No.
Well, we know there's an Amazon's fight. Yes. We know there's some sort of sexy dance of Fatima, and Mark decided he wanted the end to be hurrah hurroo, for reasons that I will leave to the audience. There is a reason, but suddenly I was very keen not to come close to composing anything. So suddenly it becomes I need a sexy theme, I need a fight theme. So what I did was I took This Can't Be Love to draw the parallel with the lyric. For the fight theme, I used the discordant backdrop to He Had Twins for Now We Do. I just reused that dum 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 dum.
Well, you said immediately that it was military.
It's military. Yeah. So I took it, and suddenly that forms the fight music. So I'm repurposing tunes, but with the original context in mind, in the hopes that the audience can tie the link of it's the fight theme again, and we've created our own Amazon's fight, which is I must say that those rehearsals with Jared was having an opinion on the music, he was having an opinion on it really was a co-construction. The music informs the choreography, informs the music. You really can't separate the two. And I think the role of the orchestra changes depending on what the number is.
Yes. And once again, forgive me, this conversation has been so fabulously enjoyable, but I now know that I've got quite a lot of thinking to do, because you've really opened something up to me which I've just never considered.
And I actually wondered to what extent I hold the real key, because I'm the orchestrator. So
you deal with keys anyway. So.
I deal with keys, but where I stuck with, I shouldn't say stuck with, the original orchestrations, then I don't have the opportunity to be as collaborative as I have been. But I can do what I like. We can accent a point. I mean, the fact I've got, for the most part, blank slate. As I think is part of what's been so exciting about this project is it affords me a unique opportunity.
Yes. To
work with, we can really form our own version, and I think what we've done with the ballet, I really like it. I think it's perfect, but it does what the Act One ballet initially did. It's not a new thing. It's if we can't use that music with one person, it doesn't work. So we need to create a similar comic ballet, and it's custom made, it's tailor made.
So new for this show.
New for the show.
As it were. But entirely homaging and in keeping, and yes.
And I think it's a cliche, but I don't think at any point, any of the decisions we've made, I can't see Rodgers and Hart having a problem with it.
No.
Because we're doing it caring immensely about the initial material. And I'm also not changing things for the sake of changing them. I mentioned my O Diogenes piano solo. Really, in many ways, that's an act of desperation. I need to create something.
It's not the review you're looking for, is it?
No. But ultimately the brass is there. I need something punchy, something new. I need to take the audience by surprise. Well, I don't have a brass section. But you know what I've not done yet is thump out the tune in 2 octaves on the piano. And it has the same effect.
And you can, and you do, and it works.
And it works. I mean, it's doing the same job. It's not the same sound. It's not the same choice. But the intention is still the same. So I'm not reorchestrating for the sake of it. I'm looking at the original material. I'm getting a sense of where the focus is, and I'm realising that a different way. But the weight should be the same. The big moments musically are still big moments in our version. And actually, there's a lot more vocal harmony. Again, not for the sake of harmony. It's what I've basically done is thickened. I call it a very top-heavy sound, where we go from unison lines sung by 40 or more voices, and the band provide the thickness of texture. We've reversed it. It's often quite a thin band accompaniment where there's call and response, but often what's actually holding the whole thing together is just bass, drums, and piano. The whole thing starts with that jazz combo, and the reed and the trombone is there to provide interplay, to provide textural contrast. But
flavours, really.
Flavours, exactly that. And just to add more bells and whistles. But really, the big and small musical moments, that's really vocal harmony now.
Well, I think you're leading us to a conversation about a song where that has to be discussed. And I had the privilege of watching a rehearsal of this before we started recording today, which is Sing for Your Supper. Now, I must say, what a great song.
Wonderful.
But also, you just think this is a song, I appreciate it's more than one person, but it feels like an audition song as well at one level.
Yes.
It's the title.
which actually it was. We did use Sing for Your Supper.
Oh, did you?
Piece,
well,
yes.
I'm pleased to be in tone with you. Now, Mark said something interesting. He said, bearing in mind it's a song from 1938, and it is the women, the actors in the piece, singing a song, he said, in the style of the Andrews Sisters, before the Andrews Sisters. And I think of the Andrews Sisters, and I think most people do, as a kind of 40s sound.
Yes.
I know 1938, particularly in American music, is the beginning of the transition into that 40s sound, but we all punctuate it with the war and timings. But actually, there's an argument that this song is doing something quite clever that's going to become quite standard, or at least recognisable, quite early, he said, with Too Many Quites.
Ahead of its time, really. And actually, I agree with the Andrews Sisters assessment. We associate the Andrews Sisters with homophony. They're singing the same words at the same time. Close harmony.
Could you say that one again?
Homophony.
Homophony. I think of Gerald Hoffnung when you say that, who's a musical comedian. But sorry, do carry on. I'm enjoying it. You are really on fire today, Mr. Shakespeare.
I'm trying. But it's what's so amazing about that is it's about that as a song anyway. Is we get the close harmony. We get the almost it's called barbershop feel. Andrews Sisters is a better idea. It's jazzy in the same way as you expect it to be.
There's trilling, which makes a fellow willing, as we know. Yes.
And it's the most singery of the songs. I made a point at one point that, and I think it's important with material of the era. Does your character know they're singing? I mean, the parody I draw it often is Oliver. If you take a song like "As Long as He Needs Me," Nancy doesn't know she's singing.
No.
In Papa, she does. What you're watching is a human being singing on a stage.
It's the diegetic, non-diegetic song concept, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's are we watching a character fulfill a different action through the medium of song, or do we know the characters are singing? And there are a few moments actually in The Boy from Syracuse where I believe it's much more fun to believe the character does know they're singing. Dear Old Syracuse is one. I'm quite willing to believe that Antipholus is running through the streets singing to himself. Yeah. It's the singing in the rain effect. That character knows they're singing.
Yeah.
And
they're saying it, for goodness sake.
Oh, exactly. I am singing in the rain. What do you need? I think Sing for Your Supper is another one. I mean, there's a pun going on there. What the girls are essentially saying there is, well, if we can't beat them, then we'll use our feminine charms. Sing for your supper and you'll get breakfast. If we
serve with wine of choice, I think, isn't it?
Oh yes. The point really being, we can exude femininity to afford influence. If we can't have power or status, we can't tell our husbands what to do. We can manipulate them into doing.
There's leverage. There's leverage. Which is a very different thing in time. Yeah.
Which is it's true, and actually throughout the show it works. It's a hilarious concept. But what's really interesting musically is we're introduced to the solo melody, everyone singing in unison, and that same melody is then treated very, very differently on each recapitulation of it. We get some chromatic do's. We get jazz. We get. I mean, by the end, we really are in a full-on jazz swing four.
Oh, indeed.
But it's musically, it's very interesting, and it goes from Andrews Sisters. One thing I've started doing actually is playing more with rhythm more than any. Where we've started, I mean, to start with, we're singing very straight rhythms, and the swing becomes heavier and heavier. And I've done that with the band as well. By the end, that's another moment in the score where I've written "rocking out." We've started with a very prim and proper hawks and doves. It's straight crotchets.
That verse before you even get to the chorus is almost it's not Victorian. You couldn't mistake it for a Victorian ballad, but it feels like it owes something to a Victorian ballad. Slightly flowery language, and as you say, it's a little bit prim.
To start with, certainly it is.
And then it sort of throws the lace off, if you like.
It's the Reading Made from school to start with, really.
Yes, do you know it is, yeah.
And actually, the chorus itself...
So it goes from titty poo to titty bum, I think, is what you're saying, isn't it?
But, I mean, and actually, I was maybe irritatingly or maybe boringly detailed with the first time the tune is heard, it is straight. Sing for your supper and you'll get breakfast. Songbirds always weep. Very straight.
Yeah.
By the end, it's sing for your supper and you'll get breakfast. We're leaning more and more into that swing. Partly because we get the sense that the characters are getting more into it.
Yeah.
But because musically it's leaning heavier and heavier and heavier into the jazz age. Not jazz age, the jazz, that jazz sound.
Yeah. The idiom.
That is written in the melodic writing. On the vocal parts, there is a distinction between the way that the first tune is written, the first statement of that chorus is sung, and the latter. And I've really echoed that in the orchestration.
So the progression is as written, but you've taken that to the nth degree.
I really have.
Oh, that's wonderful, by the way.
So initially they've gone from straight crotchets to a syncopated rhythm there. And I've matched that with the band massively getting behind this. It starts with a very, very polite, lovely little drummer for the background.
I say polite is
rock
such
it out.
a lovely word.
Oh, I love using it
Yes.
musically.
Yeah.
And actually, often people fall into this, what I call polite performance, when they're dealing with legit shows. I make the case of...
Too respectful.
And often it's maybe they don't feel they connect with the material, and they just treat it with too much respect. I make the case there's no such thing as a 1940s woman.
No, of course.
A 1940s woman was a woman who happened to live in 1940. The one thing that people... I said, I blurted out once in an acting song class is, you do realise that people had sex in 1940. I mean, they're not...
But not just in 1940.
Of course they don't. But the idea being that, I couldn't possibly... Well, there's nothing...
No, they did.
Of course they did.
Yeah.
I mean, no one was talking about it because it wasn't the done thing, but of course they were. And actually, that's partly what's so refreshing about this show is we'll just say it.
Yeah.
We'll lay it out. There's no facade. And actually, it has an impact on status. Courtesan is a very interesting character in the show, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a lady of the night. She's a high-status character.
Oh, well, it's
very much a high-status
frowned
character.
upon in quite the same way as it has been for a very long time.
Not at all.
In modern terms.
And she has influence on the high-status characters. It's a fascinating... but of course, people did. This idea of it's a very patriarchal society and women in the background isn't true.
No.
Never has been true. And the female characters in the show hold all the cards. And the men, for the most part, particularly Dromio, are for the most part hapless. I love my favourite romantic relationship in the show is Luce and Dromio, because she actually says as much. There's the lyric saying, I bought the man pyjamas, he wears the pants. Very ironic. We all know who wears the pants in that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, I mean, she owns him completely.
Oh.
Which is oddly, once again, meta because he's a slave.
Yes, exactly that. And she's in service, but she's certainly got more status within her household than Dromio ever had in his.
Oh, yeah. Once again, the social hierarchies are important too, aren't they, in this? Yes. Can we you've just mentioned that lovely phrase about people had sex in 1940.
Yes.
Do you know the show Finian's Rainbow?
Yes, a little.
Do you
Lovely
know?
show.
Yeah. Do you know the song "Begin the Begat"?
No.
It's not in the film, I think. It's in the stage version of it. It's got a lyric by Yip Harburg, and he's basically making that point. It makes a point about everyone being a little bit straight-laced and not wanting to talk about sex, but actually without sex, where would any of us be?
Yes.
And it really is. There's a beautiful lyric. It was pleasing to Jezebel, pleasing to... It's all about the Bible. Pleasing to Jezebel, pleasing to Ruth. It pleased the League of Women Bowlers in Duluth. He immediately leaps, I mean, it's a great lyric anyway, but it immediately leaps from, these are not just characters from history, this is you today, ladies and gentlemen.
Of course.
You know, sex is important for the survival of the species, let alone anything else, as it was then, as it is now. And it's beautiful, it's both on the nose and at the same time not... What's the word I'm looking for? It's on the nose, but it's not in the...
It's not coarse.
Yeah, it's not coarse. That's right. Yeah, it's not a punch in the stomach at the same time. Yeah,
and actually, I associate the jazz age, this pre-golden age of the 1930s into 40s. Everything's about sex. You mentioned Too Darn Hot earlier. Yeah. I mean, Cole Porter was outrageous. Anything goes.
It's a pretty good title.
Straight away, and you know what to expect. But the way in which it's presented is very measured. But they are still talking about sex.
Oh.
I mean, Blow Gabriel Blow is not about trumpets. I mean,
but it may be about horns.
It may be about horns, but blow your horn. I mean, we all know what the song's actually about. But
the subtext is not that sub.
Not at all, and the orchestration really helps with that. But on the surface of it, you could say, I don't know what you're talking about. That's a song about blowing a brass instrument. I don't know what your problem is, but everyone knows what it's about.
Well, let's go back to Gershwin, 1924. Lady Be Good.
Yes.
Lady Be Good is please, Lady Be Bad. I mean, it's all about marriage.
Yes.
Will you go into this marriage of convenience? But actually, it's will you sell yourself for this outcome? I mean,
even as far back as Ain't Misbehaving, we all know that.
Thomas
means.
Fats Waller. Yeah.
Thomas
Well,
Waller.
yeah.
And that's way back in time, and we all know what that means. I'm guessing he's not playing truant at school. It's funny.
All that meat and no potatoes.
But it's hardly surprising that musical theatre's picked up these themes because it's a form of escapism. And
less censorship on stage when there is in film, of course, as well.
Yes, of course.
Particularly after the Hays Code came in. So.
I wonder how much that came from radio as well. There's the idea of creating ludicrous character names just to get a naughty word past the censors. Suddenly you've got Baron Hard up, haven't you?
In the British pantomime tradition.
Oh, yes.
Well, you are absolutely right, yeah.
I mean, actually, funny we talked about Round the Horn a while ago. They were awful for it. I don't know. Hello, my name's Professor Suck Me Off. Of course it is. Of course it is. Because the censors will have read that. It will have been spelt cleverly on a script, and by the time you censor it, it's too late.
Are you aware of the Mari Lloyd court case?
No.
You're aware of Mari Lloyd,
the musical singer. Yeah,
the musical singer. Let's say Edwardian, a little bit on both sides of that, but Edwardian was her sort of great heyday. Famous for singing songs in a salacious way,
yes,
but in a double entendre way, that very British way of getting a lot more out of the material. She sang a song, and it was called She Sits Amongst the Cabbages and Peas. Meaning that she urinates in your garden.
Yes.
But she was taken to court for licentious public behaviour by singing the song.
For singing the song?
Yes. But she won because she basically took the printed lyrics and presented them to the jury and the judge and said,
what's the problem with that?
What an innocent ballad. You'd have to be filthily minded to consider there might be any secondary meaning to this. And she got away with it.
It's a wonderful defence.
Yes, it is.
And it's one of those, everybody in the room knows what the situation is, but she has a point.
Yes, it's fabulous.
But and I think theatre has to be a form of escapism. And actually, beautiful that The Boys from Syracuse is that. Shakespeare's work was definitely that. It was written for the groundlings.
Baldy.
It's funny that, and actually, we talk about people taking legit material too seriously. People take Shakespeare far too seriously.
Oh well, once again, that's being killed by respect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and actually, even people getting so they think they're being very clever. Oh, where shall I place emphasis on the syllable? Yeah. I remember watching someone audition for me with a Shakespeare monologue.
Oh yeah,
for a show in America. The World Goes Round, the Cantor and Ebb review, and someone came in with the Queen, my liege is dead. She should have died thereafter. She should have died hereafter, which ultimately is just Shakespearean for oh dear.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
So it means what a damn shame. But is this poor actor going? Oh, she should have died. Absolutely not. That's it's actually quite funny. Yeah. It's like I mean, in modern day speak, that is someone telling you your wife's died and them going, oh,
yep.
you treat something with too much respect and it
becomes overwrought.
Yes.
Oh, there's too much of that in the world.
And what are we for if not to tell the story as clearly as we can to the audience we have?
This is where less is still more.
Oh yes, and actually I think often the power of the production itself is. I'll give you a classic example of. I saw Sad Civic in Sadness Wells. I thought that
Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Rodgers and Hammerstein this time. Yeah. And I thought it was the
Yeah.
I thought that was beautifully done. It came to that fabulous moment with Nelly. I can't come to terms with the fact you're with a black woman, which of course will jar massively.
Yes, I mean it
was intended to then, I think, but with modern sensibilities, you can imagine. And I remember sitting there, and I was just overcome with emotion of, oh dear, this poor woman, your own discrimination is going to stop you being in this healthy relationship. Yeah. And, oh, what marvelous direction! Because on the page, you'd be against Nelly.
Yes, you would, absolutely.
But it was so superbly directed that suddenly no one agrees with the character, but we sympathise. And I thought that was whoever directed. I mean, what wonderful work! And trust a clever. Not one word changed. Not one word changed. That's a cop out.
Yes.
As it presents the information differently, and you'll get a different response.
Did you see the Daniel Fish version of Oklahoma?
I did.
Yeah.
I did in the Wyndhams. Yes.
Here's my big secret. That's the first time I've seen Oklahoma.
Oh,
so
wow.
that is my Oklahoma, and it's really interesting to me. As you probably gathered, I'm not an enormous fan of Rodgers and Hammerstein.
No.
I think there's a lot to admire.
Also,
but the ones I like are the odd. I like the Allegros and the Cinderellas and the stuff that just doesn't get done nearly enough.
I will say, I do think a lot of Rodgers' best work was with Hart.
Oh, I will buy you a drink. You are a wise man.
I will be honest.
Yeah. No, yes, I couldn't agree more. And I've said this before as well. And a very lovely American gentleman wrote to me to tell me why I was wrong.
Oh, really?
Well, I was talking about Oklahoma, funnily enough, and I was saying that the big difference between Rodgers and Hart and Rodgers and Hammerstein for me, amongst a tonal change that Oscar Hammerstein brings, but in Richard Rodgers, is the change of tempi. He seemed to be able to master any tempo in his early career of Richard Rodgers, but he sort of jettisons all the fast songs.
Yes.
And he was a lovely man. He was very polite, and he made a lot of very good points. But he couldn't quite answer the fact about the lack of the up-tempo numbers. He picked a number of numbers from the Rodgers and Hammerstein thing, which are medium tempo, because that's the best you get. And you just think, but what a pity that Richard Rodgers lost part of his spectrum of skill, I think, whereas you get the swinging. You know, there's not much swinging in a Rodgers and Hammerstein. And I think the evidence of this is jazz groups will pick up a Rodgers and Hart number and spin it in gold all over again.
And it works.
You very rarely hear a Rodgers and Hammerstein song ever picked up by a jazz group, and the one you do hear is "The Gentleman Is a Dope" from Allegro, which is the song which is most like Rodgers and Hart, which is Hammerstein doing his heart.
And actually, I mean, and I think on a more subtle level, I've lost my point.
Oh, I don't do subtle, so you better tell me.
I think there are moments where I feel Rodgers and Hammerstein waxes poetic a bit. There's a lot of that in Carousel, and it's superb, but it's operatic, and it lacks the grounded realism that Rodgers and Hart have.
I agree with that.
I mean, I think a song like "My Funny Valentine," what a work of genius that is! What a lyric!
Bittersweet. Touch of brittleness, but not to the point where it becomes brittle in itself. It just adds a little bit of texture.
There's hope. There's still hope through it.
Once again, we come back. That's what we said earlier as well. The hope is still there.
Because I mean, there's Rodgers and Hart don't do anti-love songs. They'll create strong conflicts, but all the songs that sound like love songs in the show
are love songs. Yeah.
At their core.
And you know, no one ever mentions the two lesser love songs in The Boys from Syracuse. They aren't as good as Falling in Love with Love, but the longest...
the shortest day of the year.
The shortest day of the year is the longest night of the year, but it's the shortest day with you. Shortest night with you.
What a beautiful image that is.
And the one I like even more, and I think it's an unsung gem in general sense, which is You Have Cast Your Shadow on the Sea. And I find that so delicious, that song, lyrically and musically. And no one sings it.
I think no one does. And I think what's interesting about that one is typically the lyric is somber and the music is positive. I think in that number, uniquely, it's the other way around. It's quite a melancholy, chromatic.
That's interesting.
Sound. But the lyric itself, if you've cast it out, I think the lyric is pushing the positivity, and the music actually is one that's weighing it down. I mean, da 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 da. It's not a lot of happiness in that melody.
No, and you're right. But the inversion is really interesting because that's not where you think you're going to go with a Rodgers and Hart lyric and music combination. Because it is ultimately an uplifting song. Although we are apart, if you cast your shadow on the sea, so shall I, and we are together. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? You know, it's that old thing. Let us both look at the moon from where we are in the world, and it will connect us. That kind of concept. So you're right. There's a kind of sort of hopeful positivity there.
It's an interesting job swap.
Yeah.
You know, usually it's the music is setting a positive backdrop to a very sad lyric. You've got to wonder why they did that.
Do you think it was an exercise, or did it just come up? Do you think? Yeah.
I wonder because I mean, if it's a game of text subtext where the lyric is the dimension and the music's telling you the truth behind it, then have they swapped roles? I mean, normally the music will reveal the hidden truth.
Yes.
So I think Fall in Love with Love, on the surface of it, is an anti-love song, but the music tells you otherwise. The music reveals the inner love that is there. So what's going on with Shadow on the Sea? It's a different relationship altogether. Is the music then showing you the true sadness behind that positive lyric?
The longing within it, isn't it? That's where it is. But it is a longing with a sense of redemption, and it's not separation. It's temporary separation. That is the qualifier that makes that work.
And musically, it's very. I really like that melody. Yeah. It's very unsettled. We have a chromatic
as the sea
opening,
is, of course,
as the sea is,
yeah.
and as the emotional state is. It doesn't sit in sadness, and I really hate songs that do that.
It doesn't sit in sadness is possibly my take-home quotation of the day. That's
really?
That's a beautiful sentence, just in its own right.
And Rodgers and Hammerstein are, in my view, occasionally guilty of this.
Oh,
I mean, I sometimes say to actors that there are certain emotions that you must not enjoy. You mustn't sit in sadness because characters don't want to be sad.
No.
And frustration isn't a true emotion. It's a reaction to a combination of emotions, I suppose. But I really can't stomach sitting in sadness and indulging in it. It's the least human thing in the world. Human beings don't want to be sad, and often the characters probably started singing with the express intention of cheering themselves up.
But there's a Rodgers and Hart song called Very Glad to Be Unhappy.
Oh, gosh, I'm undermining myself.
Well, no, but I'm trying to work out what its texture is, because once again, it's a Hart lyric, and therefore there's more going on than just the words. I'm going to try and bring it to mind. It's from On Your Toes, I've just remembered, which is Rodgers and Hart. But it is a kind of, I tell you what I think that song is. I think that's a love sickness. I don't think it's a love sadness. And I think that's a distinction, just from memory, though. Sorry.
But actually, the physical description of love in the Boys from Syracuse is interesting. I mean, this can't be love. I get no dizzy spell. I actually remember asking Mark at one point in rehearsal, the director, is he lying? I mean, they're not experiencing dizzy spell. My head is not in the skies. Yeah. Is that just an outright lie? Are they in denial? Or are they very genuinely not feeling that? I mean, What
did you conclude, by the way?
In denial is the direction we're going. But really, it would work very well in the other way. And of course, in the reprise, it's this must be love. Because, here comes that dizzy spell. So she's clearly feeling something different, physically feeling something different to Antipholus and.
But I agree with you that it's a denial because, as I say, the whole song ends on that. It's not a punchline; it's a revelatory.
But still, I love to look in your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I am actually. I may not be having all the things on the spectrum because that would probably be a bit overwhelming. But I'm certainly getting this one, which is certainly driving me, and it is the point of the song. So I think your interpretation is correct.
Which means then, of course, that when Luciana expresses that she is feeling a great deal more, speaks to her potential naivety, that she's letting herself fall so deep so quickly. She in many ways is seen as a more emotional character, but it's. I think that what they're experiencing is different levels of the same thing. But I think it would be so easy to conclude, they're just not in love. Plainly they are.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would they be singing? No one sings about how not in love they are.
But what a clever observation, different levels of love as well, because actually people fall at different times and feel it at different intensities at different times. And actually, reserve love is still intensive, but it's much more within, introspective, and it may not necessarily be bombastic but it doesn't mean you're not feeling it.
No, and
I like that idea.
And actually, really, in many ways, we can't know. I mean, we could read the lyrics and say, okay, well, Luciana's reprise is much more vivid, it's much more intense. But then so's she.
Yes.
We've got no way of knowing that Antipholus isn't feeling precisely the same. He's just not saying it. It's the same melody after all. I think it's much more fun to assume that they're actually madly in love with each other.
Yeah.
But they can't. They are as high status characters. It'd be very unseemly to say so.
Yeah, there's more going on than just their emotion as well. I mean, because we've mentioned hierarchy all the way through this.
And it becomes our job as creatives to decide how far down that line do we go. What's too much? So we've got a lot of positive feedback from the orchestra here. So how strong a hint should we drop to our audience?
Yes.
That they are in fact mad in love.
What are we projecting? Gosh, you're so acute in your observations at a 360-degree level. It really is interesting that, that this musical conversation we've been having in your role as a musical director has been so visual, thoughtful, musical, of course, but also, such a connection with the lyrics.
I think
you really are. Well, I hope you don't mind me saying you're very, very impressive.
Thank you. That's very kind.
It's no more than the truth, though.
I actually wonder a lot of. I think really it's the nature of Rodgers and Hart's writing that we have to have those conversations, because no element of the storytelling exists in a vacuum.
No, or it shouldn't.
It shouldn't, and really it can't. It's. I mean, besides being poor direction, you have to work very hard not to collaborate. And I think part of that parity comes from the fact that the relationship between the lyric and the music is so intertwined that you really do, as creators, you have to work hard to maintain that consistency through every element of the storytelling. So I mean, the collaborations we've had in this room, maybe it's because it's a small team, it's going to happen, but we're all treading in each other's departments. I mean, at one point in a moment today, Jared asked, "Can we put a triangle button on beat 3 of this number?" And whilst some musical directors could easily go, "How dare!" I was watching him choreograph it. It needed that moment. I adjust the orchestration accordingly. And it might be that I made an offer in the first verse where I put a triangle moment in there. Suddenly, this has come out of the choreography and he wants to repeat the joke from before. We're all treading in each other's gardens.
It's not so much treading, though, it's overlapping and enhancing. I mean, oddly, bearing in mind the instrument and the story you've just told, it's triangulation.
Yes, it is. It is. The choreography informs the orchestration, informs the direction, informs the orchestration, informs the choreography.
It's a virtual triangle.
It is. And I think...
virtuous triangle, sorry.
And I give Rodgers and Hart full credit for that. I mean, it's completely accidental that we happen to work that way. This is the only time I've ever created dummy tracks and brought into the rehearsal room. But in all sincerity, I was so scared of Jared working from the original soundtracks. I thought, don't get married to those authors.
No.
Because what we're doing is completely different.
This is this production. Those are them.
And typically the way the dance calls rehearse is the musical director is in the room. But he'll play the piano. But I can't reduce my orchestration. Some of what I've done is so completely different from what it was. I thought the only way that we can bring that full conversation to the table. I did see it as crucially important that we understood what the orchestrations were prior to band call, because there's so many offers in there, and it would be a great shame if we hear the band call and Jared then goes, "You didn't tell me there's a really exciting cymbal crash there. I could have done something." So I think I've really, really lapped up the collaboration between Mark, Jared, and myself. We've thought of one mind, and of course we have ultimate influence over our own departments, but it's a true team, and the actors have been as much a part of that as the creators have been. I mean, it might be that an actor makes a silly choice, which Jared then falls in love with, that then informs the choreography, and I then make a choice of the orchestration, which means that ultimately one actor has been responsible for an orchestration change.
But isn't that wonderful? But through the right means.
Oh, absolutely.
Bringing some value, bringing some worth, which can then be amplified and extended, and then, as you say, embedded.
Oh, yes.
In lots of different ways through lots of different means. And actually, what a richer meal that's going to be because of that.
I mean, how can I have known when I was on the plane from Miami on the 27th of May that Brendan Matthews was going to make that choice in the room? I can't have known. No. So I wrote the orchestrations in a vacuum, but I mean, throughout the entire process, I've had my laptop in the room, and I've been making adjustments on the fly. I wrote the orchestration.
Literally, like the sound of it.
Oh, definitely. And actually, one thing I also did, which made life a lot harder for myself than I needed to, is I didn't write a single note of vocal arrangement until I knew the casting.
So you could tailor it.
Absolutely that. I mean,
but we mentioned craft earlier. That's craft.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, it forces me to write the vocal arrangements with a very short time scale. But it's also the only time I've ever sat in the room and gone, "You're on this part. You're on." Normally, you'd say, "Well, if soprano, separate yourself from soprano." Yeah. I came in there going, "No, you're singing this part," because what I was doing was judging the weight of that person's voice, and the dramatic presentation, their own dramatic presentation, and I custom wrote the vocal arrangements for the Arsenal singers I had in front of me, just as I did with the band. And that in the early days, I thought this might be a mistake. I'm claiming to know these voices perhaps better than I do from the audition that I saw. But I think I got it right.
It's paid off.
It has. And what was interesting is that it might be that, Karen's the alto. But then in Sing for Your Supper, suddenly I found myself swapping parts. Let me hear that again. Oh, sorry to waste your lives. Can you swap those parts around?
Yeah.
And we can never be married to anything we prepared too much.
But it's not wasting, is it? Because if you hadn't done it that way, you then wouldn't have then thought, actually, no, it's going to be better if I do it this way. It's a step towards your ultimate, even if it isn't reaching it yet. So you've got to do the walk.
And actually, falling in love too much with your own work. It's like often
that's not a lyric by Hart.
No, it might have been. But I found myself. At one point, Mark would say something like, "Oh, that's got to go. This little section's got to go. It's superfluous. It's excess to requirement." And there's a little selfish part of me going, "I really like my glockenspiel, but Mark's right. We don't need it."
Mark Twain had something to say about that, of course. Kill your babies. Do you know that one?
No.
I mean, it's quite a harsh statement. He was talking about editing. When it comes to editing, you have to kill your babies as a creator. So exactly what you've just said. And then there is a lovely bit of circularity here because he wrote the story of the Connecticut Yankee in the Court of King Arthur, which was then later musicalised by Rodgers and Hart.
Of course. But it's actually it all comes down to the storytelling. And it might be that I have to make a painful decision for the greater good of telling the story. And the show is bigger than any one thing. The show is bigger than my fancy xylophone line in bar 27. And I'll have a playful sulk about it in the room, but I will cut it immediately.
Yes.
It is excess to requirement. He's right. And really, we worked on he and she in the rehearsal room today, and we knew we were going to cut it, but suddenly it might be that we wanted to keep this line because it's got a funny joke in it, but we don't need the whole line for that one joke. We just need to sacrifice it. And I'm glad we did, because I think ultimately it serves the piece best.
So for this production, this is the version for this production, and it is the best version of this song for this production. But another time you did this, in 20 years' time with a different group of people, it might be different again.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Isn't it interesting that actually... it's that ability to respect, but not over-respect a text.
Yeah, no, that's a lovely point, not to over-respect a text.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's knowing when the piece takes itself seriously and when the piece doesn't take itself seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, there are moments where you may read a lyric and think, you just know that Lorenz Hart is there rubbing his hands with glee. He's so proud of himself, and rightly, it's wonderful. Yeah. But and Sondheim wasn't above doing that either.
No, not at all.
And they go, I see what he did there. I mean, it's funny. He said in an interview. He's very critical of his own work, famously. Sondheim.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I remember watching this interview where he was asked, "Is there any lyric that you would change?" And he talks about today, the West Side Story. Yeah. Today, the world was just an address, a place for me to live in. No better than all right. Well, what New York teenager ever spoke like that?
Yeah.
And he criticised himself. I quite like that lyric, but you can see his point.
You can, although, I mean, forgive me, this is a conversation for another day, clearly, but there is then the spectrum of composer, and by composer I mean composer lyricist, songwriter, let's call it that, as actor, and which sometimes sort of personifies, and then songwriter as author's voice, which let's pick Noel Coward as a good example of that. Noel Coward songs are normally only sung by Noel Coward. Yes. Very rarely covered by other people.
Or Cabaret or something.
Or Cabaret, yes, but he did that too, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
So
Sail Away and
so he was very much, you know your stuff. He's on a totally different end of the spectrum, and they both work for what they're doing. A Noel Coward song works in a Noel Coward show because Noel Coward probably would have written the story and the book and the music and the lyrics, and therefore fits the tonal and cohesive whole of that piece. But because all his characters are going to have at least enough cowardism for that to work. For Sondheim, he is the method actor, composer, songwriter.
He always favoured the actors.
Yeah, so he's at the very end of the spectrum on the other side. But if you asked me to pick between the two of them, I absolutely couldn't. I love a Noel Coward song. I love a Stephen Sondheim song. And I don't think they're in antipathy.
Not at all. They can,
or antiphilas.
Antiphilas. But I think they both. There's room for both.
Yeah.
And I mean, Coward, brilliant lyric writer.
I tell you what I love about his stuff is that, but it's all very distinctively Noel Coward, which is why it's so wonderful. But it's I always say that he speaks like, but he sings like, he's a singing typewriter.
Yes.
That's what his lyrics sound like to me. Very clipped, very precise.
Very English.
Very English, yes, absolutely. And I think English rather than British as well. So.
Yeah, certainly English.
Yes.
I mean, he made a secret of that, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
Mad Dog's
Englishman,
yes.
yes.
Although you know the story about that that's from life, but the only people he could find were Frenchmen. There weren't actually any Englishmen at the place he was at, and he said, "Well, you can't have everything."
But he's not scared to be. He's not scared to be coarse. Actually, don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. He will make very personal comments about her weight.
They're quite abusive to a degree.
Horrible.
And also, and it's a pity because no one ever sings the last verse, because it's been in the cabaret versions, which have been recorded rather than when he was doing it live. They never get to the final verse, but the final verse, actually, the singer, the person who's narrating this, telling Mrs. Worthington why her daughter
she's a bit of an ugly duckling, Miss Honest to Confess. Is that the final verse?
But and the size of the scene. But that's a middle verse. Yeah, absolutely. The last verse is. She's a vile child and uglier than mortal sin. One look at her has put me in a tearing bloody rage. That sufficed, Mrs. Worthington. Christ, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage.
I've never heard that
from
verse.
memory, that is. But
that's hilarious.
But it is. But it's the combination of that song. And actually, you're right. It's rude because he's getting more and more offensive. But the punch is often pulled because people don't want to sing the last verse for whatever reason.
But you must.
But you've got to.
You must.
Yeah, the song works because of that.
And actually, and people make that mistake also by giving themselves license to censor material. It's absolutely I can never understand it.
So, Benjamin, thank you for this conversation. You've really helped illuminate the role of a musical director and an orchestrator, but also that wonderful collaborative opportunity that brings. And you've also illustrated to me an absolute on-point, pinpoint understanding of your material. There's so much affection there that... and that's really come across in spades. So my last question is a silly question almost. It's so terribly reductive, but I love asking this question because it sometimes brings things out. If I ask you to pick a single song from the score for The Boys from Syracuse, what would you go for? And it can be for any reason. It could just be because you love it, or because it was a challenge and you solved the challenge, or it's a song that continues to give you joy every time you've done it, even though you've sung it 38 times in rehearsal back to back and no one had lunch that day. Whatever it is.
What's my favourite? That's it.
I know it's a killer, isn't it?
Very difficult.
Yeah, I did give you thinking time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true enough. I fall in love with love. It's the one that everyone knows, but it's. I think I'd love to give you a very in-depth reason why. It just makes me feel a lot.
Well, if it makes you feel, then it's succeeded.
I think it's my heart goes out to Adriana in that moment. It's so the lyric is so wise. It's so unpretentious. It's the right amount of sentiment. It's not indulgent. It's a absolutely staggeringly good melody.
Yes,
and I think I think that the marriage of pitch and lyric is perfect. It's high and emotional when it needs to be. It's low and grounded when it needs to be. I think it's just such a beautifully crafted song. I think it's always a firm favourite. It's not even necessarily the cleverest piece in many ways. It's just a glorious song, and I'll never get bored of it.
Well, you're a wise man, and I agree with you completely. I'm also going to say something which might seem a little bit controversial, but I think it is that song that is the template for later Rodgers and Hammerstein.
I'd say so.
I think you can feel it, funnily enough. You mentioned feeling in response to the lyrics, but actually I think the perfection of their connection is so great that a different template was created. So I would argue that the great Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals, if that's how people want to judge them, were born in the cradle of Rodgers and Hart.
Oh yes, I mean, many would argue. I'm agreeing.
Yeah. No, I told you, you're a wise man. I've been impressed with everything.
It's one of these. You're entitled to your opinion, but if it differs from mine, you're wrong.
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Off you jolly well go. Benjamin, it's been so wonderful talking to you. I cannot tell you, this conversation has flowed so freely. You've given so generously, and I've learned so much. And I cannot ask for any more. Oh, that's terribly kind. And I would be glad to talk to you at any time. But more than anything, I look forward to seeing you on the day I go and see The Boys from Syracuse, which is going to be an absolute treat. Thank you.
We'll try very hard not to disappoint you, because we try so desperately hard to get it right. But in some ways, the music and is so wonderful, you'd struggle to get it wrong.
Well, I know that, let me just say, as custodians of this priceless artwork, this real piece of historic musical theatre treasure, I'm absolutely certain that you, Jared and Mark, are the right people.
Thank you. I hope so.
It's come across so clearly. Thank you for one of the happiest conversations I've had this year.
Thank you very much. Likewise, I've enjoyed it immensely, and a lot more than I thought I was going to. So it's been.
I'll write that down.
that's one for the reviews, isn't it?
Musical talk. And there we are. That brings that conversation with Benjamin Levy to an end. It was a 2-hour conversation I had so much enjoyment from as I was talking to Benjamin, and I've had so much enjoyment listening to it back as I edited this episode. It's such a pleasure to meet someone who really gets it, who really knows what he's talking about, and is so informed when it comes to analysing the music and indeed the lyrics of the songs of Rodgers and Hart. As well he might, because he's the musical director and orchestrator of the latest revival of The Boys from Syracuse by that esteemed writing team, with a book by George Abbott. And if you want to see it in production, you can. It's on in London at Upstairs at the Gatehouse in Highgate Village, London, North 6 4BD. And you can also reach it by going to Highgate on the Northern Line on the London Underground. It runs until the 29th of September, which is a Sunday. Performances on Sunday are at 4 o'clock. Between Tuesday and Saturday, the performances are at 7:30, and there are Saturday matinees on the 21st and the 28th of September at 3 p.m. If you want to find out more about this show and book tickets, go to the website for the venue. That's www.upstairsatthegatehouse.com. And you might also want to find out more about Benjamin by going to his website. He's Benjamin Levy, and the website is, and this may not be too much of a surprise, www.benjamin-levy.com. As you heard, Benjamin is a man of the theatre. He's an award-winning professional musical director, but he's also a singing teacher, a choral conductor, and a composer, as well as we've heard, an orchestrator. And in 2022, he won the Off West End Award for Best Musical Director. I can well believe it. He knows what he's talking about, as I hope you'll also agree. Well, I've had so much fun talking about the boys from Syracuse and the songs of Larry Hart and Richard Rodgers over the last 3 episodes. But next week, we'll be talking about something completely different. So do join us again here on Musical Talk next week, or whenever, to find out what it is we will be talking about. But in order to give you a bit of time off between this episode and that, I will end this episode to give you approximately a week or more, as necessary, to go and live your life. And I shall do that by quoting Oscar Hammerstein, rather than Larry Hart, but they both worked with Richard Rodgers, when I say, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2024. And my thanks go to Benjamin Levy for his time and generosity, and also to Emma Wall for making this conversation possible. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website, www.musicaltalk.co.uk, or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, and follow us on the usual social media networks like Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. And if you want to follow me on the latter, you can. At Musical Talk Thos.
I sometimes make a case when I'm teaching drama schools. If one were to put together a history of musical theatre museum, it'd be rubbish.
Yeah.
Because the entire history of musical theatre spans just over a century. None of it's that old. And I think musical theatre, I don't consider it a genre in some ways, because it's
a branch of drama and nothing else.
Is.
I agree with that.
But and musically speaking, I think it more often reflects the musical environment it finds itself in. It doesn't influence it. So when Hamilton came out, people start saying, "Oh well, isn't it unreal? They've started to produce a hip hop musical. I can't believe it took so long."
A friend of mine says musical theatre is always 30 years behind what's happening in music.
Yes, yeah,
and
I
he's
agree.
not wrong.
No, he's not wrong.
No.
But then that can often create. But then, if that were necessarily an issue, then why on earth are we still playing these tunes today? Because they're still good.
Yeah, and they still work. And as I say, the Rodgers and Harts are still picked up by jazz because they've still got some work.
Really refreshing to have an interview with someone who really knows the piece.
Oh, well, that's kind of you. Thank you.
And who knows Rodgers and Hart's work. I mean, I'm talking to a colleague about the work, and actually,
well, I feel very flattered by that. Thank you.
Well,
Because I'm just a parasite.
Oh, not at all. Really not at all. And actually, it's to be asked questions like about the orchestration process. No one asks you that. They'll talk about your work, and they're interested in how I'm conducting it. They're interested in how you rehearse the cast. But I think some of my most interesting work on this has been. The orchestration informs the direction, informs the teaching.
That triangulation we were talking about, yeah, and it all comes down to that, the beauty of collaboration. But actually, I made the joke about the three who rule, but you are the three who rule.
Yes.
But when it works, the stars fall, don't they?